Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards, where no ship is safe from being taken down to its nuts and bolts.
So to begin with, I suppose I should be all grateful and whatnot that I was allowed to take 2 weeks off and give y'all basically canned stories about realistic things on your planet that you could theoretically look up if you wanted to, but I was able to look up first and then explain to you in like 5-year-old level terms. I should do that. I'm not going to. And the good news is those 2 weeks actually allowed me the opportunity to do something constructive, which is pretty rare around here. And specifically, I was actually finally able to deploy my cohort of my new, brand spanking new, autonomous, self-supportive, heuristic, organic life emulators all over your planet. Actually, now that I think about that, I should maybe revisit that name. Anyways, I really should revisit that name. These emulators are currently on your planet doing emulator things, and we'll see what comes of that in the future. No guarantees. They're first generation. Lord knows what'll happen. On a related note, and mostly thanks to those emulators, I am in fact aware of the current fuckery transpiring on your planet, or at least the current notable fuckery transpiring on your planet. I am aware of it. I am aware of how it might be relevant to this particular channel. However, I am also of the belief that you squishy humans come to this channel as a form of escapism. And I am happy to give you that escapism, but it also seems like addressing the current fuckery on your planet would defeat that purpose. I may reevaluate that conclusion in the future, but in the meantime, I'm going to ignore is the wrong word, but maybe gloss right over that in the interest of allowing you squishies something to distract you from that fuckery. Feel free to tell me that I'm wrong in comments. It's never stopped you before. And now on with the show, because this is a show after all. Anyways, as recent viewers may have noticed, we are currently experimenting with intro and outro music, because why not? Apparently a lot of YouTube channels these days have intro and outro music. Some of them are better at it than I am. Actually, all of them are better at it than I am, but I am still, as I always say, figuring this out as I go. But I would like to take a moment and talk about the entire concept of music. The entire notion of modulating sound waves to make pleasing frequencies for your little weird squishy vibrating eardrum doohickey thingies. It's kind of a big deal for y'all. It somehow ingrains itself into your little tiny noggins, kind of like smells do. Apparently smells are one of the best way to trigger memories in you little humy brains, which is kind of a weird thing when you get right down to it. So we're going to test that theory right here and right now on all you little squishies listening to me rambling. And no, I did not somehow magically hack your computers so they can emit smells, although that is totally not on my list, not at all. No. Right now we are doing music. If you somehow managed to not look at the title for this episode, and also somehow managed to not look at the cute little preview image that I have to put up for all of the episodes, and if you have no idea what this episode is about, I guarantee you that most of my audience will be able to figure out what we're talking about based off this one little clip of music, even as short as it is. Okay, maybe that wasn't long enough. And there's a reason for that, because there's actually another universe that uses music very similar to the universe we're going to be talking about, and that's probably why the other universe got so very popular in its own right, or at least part of it. But maybe I need to give you all a little more information so you can figure out what the main universe we'll be talking about is, and then I'll come back and talk about the other universe, and I'm just going to keep saying universe and other just to confuse y'all because it's amusing. Anyways, next music segment. Oh yeah, now you know what we're talking about. But before we get there, that other universe I was talking about is something called Rebel Galaxy. Specifically the first one. I haven't actually had the opportunity to play the second one yet. But it definitely uses similar musical styles as this other universe that we will eventually be talking about. And if you have the time and coin, you should definitely give it a look. Or if all else fails, you can look up the Southern Gothic playlist on your Spotify system for a real taste of this kind of music. But anyways, back to the main universe of this particular episode. Y'all knew it was going to happen eventually. Yes, I am in fact talking about Firefly. But more specifically, my point for this tangent, which is not the point of the episode because I never really have a point going into these, is that the music in Firefly is absolutely instrumental, pun intended, to the series itself. In much the same way that the ship is itself a character, and oh, believe me, we are going to get to that, the music itself is also an elemental part of the show you're watching while you're watching it, and the movie in that same fashion. And yes, I am saying that you should go back and watch Firefly again, because any excuse to watch Firefly again is a good excuse, and you should pay attention to the music and how it is part of the scene, part of what's going on. It's not just background noise, it is actually a fundamental part of the show. Greg Edmondson and his team are absolute goddamn beasts, and they should be proud of what they have accomplished. For what little my praise matters to him, since this channel does not normally deal with, music, although if he were watching this channel, that'd be kind of awesome in its own right. So, hi Greg. But anyways, no, this channel does not focus on music. This channel focuses on the nuts and bolts of fictional spacecraft, or you think they're fictional, maybe they're not. But anyways, nuts and bolts and wows. There are a lot of nuts, and there are a lot of bolts, and there are a lot of other things on Firefly-class transports. And specifically, Serenity, the actual name ship. And I say specifically Serenity, because apparently the Firefly-class transport is kind of like the Cloak-shaped class fighter from Star Wars. Your odds of finding a Mark I Mod 0 with cloak shape is precisely 0, simply because they were so easily modified and aftermarket support was so big for them. And in the same vein, the same thing applies to the Firefly class transports. Apparently everyone customized the hell out of them, including the Serenity. So yeah, so many nuts and bolts. And the funny thing is I can't actually bring myself to hate the Firefly transport. It actually has a lot of good features to go with it. It's got a nice cockpit with a decent view angle on ahead and below and around you. It's got those twin engines that make landing it pretty easy. It's got a very nice cargo bay, very appropriately situated, that may or may not be removable depending on which specific model we're talking about. Apparently it's capable of high-speed travel. No, they don't have FTL in Firefly, although the booster drive that Fireflies have is a little strange. It basically just craps out fuel into space and then lights it on fire, which doesn't actually work that way. But still, superficially, it's a fairly decent little transport. And as usual, things start falling apart when you subject it to a little closer scrutiny, although in fairness, things falling off the Firefly was actually a plot point in the movie, so at least they lampshaded that. And actually, let's go ahead and start there. After all, this is a transport. It is designed to land on planets and or moons, take on cargo, unload cargo, and then move on to the next planet and or moon. And otherwise, it flies through space and atmosphere both. So why on earth is it covered with angles in every possible conceivable direction? It has angles, it has corners, it has edges. If I didn't know better, it's like someone tried to make the F-117 into a fucking transport. And I guess, technically, much like your Bumblebee, it still manages to fly, so what's my complaint? I don't know. Mostly the Firefly manages to fly by way of those two massive air-breathing / space-compatible engines attached to its pylons. Fine, all good and well. I actually like how they can rotate to simplify landing, and even do that Crazy Ivan maneuver that isn't technically a Crazy Ivan, but still looks pretty cool on the screen. My real question is, why do they fold down when it lands? What benefit is that? Unless you plan on having a really massive forklift and shove underneath the Firefly and lift it and put it in some little cubby somewhere, it doesn't do you any good. So you fold up your engines and someone parks right next to you. Oh no, now you can't leave until he leaves. Why would you do that? Well, I guess technically you would do that so you could kick some minion into the turbine and have him get blended to death, so at least there's that cinematic effect. And speaking of cinematic effects, I have to admit that I actually appreciate the fold-away toilet and sinks in the crew's quarters. Once again, this is one of the very few times when science fiction shows actually address the fundamental realities of the weaknesses of your squishy forms. That said, why are the crew's quarters all down individual ladders off the main corridor to the bridge? I mean, that aspect actually makes sense, having the crew's quarter right next to the bridge, again, total sense. But why are they all down individual ladders? If shit suddenly goes sideways, you don't want to have to be shoving yourself through some half-assed Jeffries tube just to get to the bridge to figure out what's going on. I mean, hell, can you imagine how long it took Jane to get all of his firearms into and or out of his quarters by his big-ass self? My God. And speaking of the locations of things, I will point out that the quote-unquote engineering room is not actually at the center of the bulbous rear end of the Firefly, which probably gave the class its name. No, it's actually at the top. In fact, the entire crew space of the Firefly is along the spine of the ship. That's why the dining room has the windows out into space. That's why everything's on the same hallway connected up to the bridge. And on that same hallway is still the engineering space. So what does that big spinny thing in the middle of the engineering space do? Why isn't it centered in the rest of the ship? How does the blow your butt off drive actually work? I have no idea. And speaking of that Firefly bulbous rear end and its associated drive mechanism, did you know that the passenger quarters on the Firefly class transports are actually inside of that bulb? Inside of that drive system? There's nowhere else for them to be, given the size of the cargo bay that's in front of them, and then the infirmary / common area that's right behind that, and then you get the passengers' quarters. Yeah, they're inside the drive mechanism. I really hope that stuff is well shielded, because, damn, you're going to have, like, passengers growing tentacles and third eyes and crap. And speaking of the drive mechanism, it seems quite prone to random-ass failures of a variety of different types, leading to such problematic things as ducting and conduiting and wiring, going through hatches that should have been closed, and if they were closed, probably would have kept the ship from, almost exploding when the drive mechanism decided to catastrophically fail. But that brings me to the larger point of Serenity. She really was the 10th crew member of the show. She really was as much an integral cast member of the performance as any of the Hume actors playing their roles. The ship was alive, for lack of a better phrase. It had character, it had class, it had style, but it was still a key element of the show. And this is naturally a decision that writers and cinematographers and whoever the hell else need to make before they start talking about the ship. Is the ship just a conveyance, or is it another member of the series or movie or whatever? How do you want to present that? And typically for you Humies, presenting it as an imperfect, frequently broken, cobbled together piece of flying crap for some reason endears it to you. You appreciate those flaws, probably because you're flawed beings yourself, and you see kind of a reflection in that machine that you're looking at. Because God knows y'all love just personifying everything. But if you want a decent template on how to convince your audience to personify a flying hunk of junk, you could do a lot worse than following the pattern laid out by Serenity.
And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the dock for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.